I have held on to a lot of things in my 78 years on this earth. I have held on to my faith when everything around me was falling apart. I have held on to my dignity when people tried their best to take it from me. I have held on to the memory of my husband's voice even though it has been 11 years since I last heard it. But there was one thing I held on to above almost everything else. One small physical thing that I kept in a little velvet box on my nightstand and looked at every single morning before I started my day, and that was my wedding ring. The ring my husband Raymond placed on my finger 44 years ago on a warm June afternoon in a little white church in rural Georgia with both our families watching and the smell of gardenias coming through the open windows. That ring was not just jewelry to me. That ring was Raymond. That ring was our whole life together. And one day I reached for that velvet box and it was empty. And I knew, before I even started asking questions, I knew who had taken it. I want you to stay with me because what happened after I found that empty box is something I need you to hear, something I need to say out loud. Because I kept quiet for too long, and quiet almost swallowed me whole, and I am done being quiet now. Hi, my name is Estelle June Hargrove, and I am 78 years old, and I live in Savannah, Georgia, in a little yellow house 2 blocks from the water that I have owned for going on 26 years. Savannah is the kind of city that gets into your blood and stays there. The moss on the oak trees and the smell of the salt air and the way the light falls, golden and slow in the late afternoons. I have lived in a few places in my life, but I always came back here. This is my home. This is where Raymond and I built our life, and this is where I intend to stay until the Lord calls me home himself. I worked for 35 years as an elementary school librarian, 3rd grade through 5th grade, the best ages in the world if you ask me, old enough to really fall into a story, young enough to still believe in magic. I loved every single day of that job. I loved the smell of those books and the way a child's face looks when a story catches them. That particular kind of wonder that just opens up across their whole face, like a window being thrown wide. I retired at 68 and I miss those children still. Some of them send me cards at Christmas. A few have looked me up over the years to tell me that I was the one who made them love reading, and I hold each one of those moments like something precious. Raymond passed 11 years ago. Cancer, the fast kind, 4 months from diagnosis to goodbye. He was the best man I have ever known in my life, and I say that not because he was my husband, but because it is simply the truth. He was patient and funny and generous, and he loved me in a way that made me feel like I was worth something every single day we were together. When he died, a part of me went with him. Not the part that kept going and kept living and kept getting up every morning, but some deep, quiet part that never fully came back, and I have made my peace with that. I keep his photo on the mantle. I keep his wedding ring in the same velvet box alongside mine. I talk to him sometimes when the house is quiet. I am 78 years old, and I do not care one bit who knows it. My son is named Clifton Raymond Hargrove, named after his daddy, and from the time he was a small boy he had his father's eyes and his grandfather's stubbornness, and my own mother's laugh, and I loved him fiercely and completely, the way only a mother can love a child. He grew up good. He grew up kind. He played baseball through high school, studied business in college, got himself a decent job in real estate, and built a life I was proud of. I took credit for none of it publicly and all of it privately, the way mothers do. He met Tamara about 7 years ago at some work event or another and brought her home to meet me about 3 months into their relationship. She was polished, very polished, the kind of woman who always looks exactly put together, hair just right, nails always done, outfit always coordinated, everything about her appearance deliberate and controlled. She had a way of looking at a room that reminded me of someone taking inventory, not unkind exactly, just assessing. I noticed it, but I did not hold it against her. Some people are just like that. I made my good pot roast the night she came for dinner. Clifton's favorite since he was about 8 years old. Slow cooked with potatoes and carrots and a gravy that I have been perfecting for decades. She ate politely and said it was delicious and asked for the recipe, which I thought was a nice gesture. She talked about her job. She worked in finance, and she was clearly intelligent and driven, and I thought, well, Clifton has found himself someone with a good head on her shoulders. That is not the worst thing in the world. They got married 18 months later. Small wedding, just family and close friends, at a venue outside the city. I wore a deep green dress that Clifton said made me look like a queen, and I danced at that wedding, even though my hip was already starting to give me trouble, and I was genuinely happy for my son. I wanted him to have what Raymond and I had. I wanted him to have a partner, a real one, someone who would be in his corner for the long run. I held that hope close all through their wedding day. The first couple of years were fine on the surface. Tamara and I were never what you would call close, but we were cordial. She called on holidays and birthdays, always correctly, always on time, the way someone manages an obligation rather than nurtures a relationship. She remembered my preferences when they came for visits: decaf coffee and no onions in my food, small things that told me she was paying attention even if there was not much warmth behind the attention. I appreciated the effort even when the effort felt a little mechanical. Then Clifton's company went through a difficult period. Some restructuring, layoffs across departments, and while he kept his job, his income dropped significantly. They had a mortgage on a big house in a nice neighborhood, and 2 car payments, and the kind of lifestyle that required a certain monthly number to maintain. I knew they were stressed. Clifton called me sometimes, in the evenings sounding tired, in a way that went beyond just needing sleep. I would listen and offer what comfort I could and remind him that things cycle, that hard periods pass, that his father and I had been through lean years too and come out the other side. What I did not know, what nobody told me, was that Tamara had started looking at my things. I noticed small things going missing from my house over the course of about 8 months. At first I blamed my own memory. I am 78 and I know my memory is not what it was. And I was not going to be proud and foolish about it. A silver picture frame that I thought had been on the bookshelf. A set of my mother's good china that I kept in the hutch in the dining room. I looked for these things, and when I could not find them, I thought I must have put them somewhere and forgotten. I moved on. Then one Sunday morning, I reached for my velvet box. I do it every morning. It is part of my routine. I open the box and I look at the rings and I think about Raymond for just a moment before I start my day. It grounds me. It connects me to him across all those years and all that distance. I reached for the box and I picked it up, and it was light. Wrong kind of light. Empty light. I opened it and both rings were gone. Raymond's band and my wedding ring. The one he put on my finger in that little white church with the gardenias coming through the windows, both of them gone. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. I went through every rational explanation I could think of. Had I moved them? Had I taken them out for some reason and forgotten where I put them? Had someone broken in? I went through the whole house. Every drawer, every shelf, every cabinet, every coat pocket, every place that made any sense, and quite a few that did not. They were not in that house. I knew it before. I finished looking, but I kept looking anyway because the alternative was something I was not ready to face. I called Clifton that evening. I told him the rings were missing. I kept my voice calm, and I kept my words simple. I said, "Clifton, I cannot find Daddy's ring or my wedding ring, and I have looked everywhere." His response was not what I expected. He was quiet for a moment too long. A beat passed where a normal response would have come. And then he said, "Mama, are you sure you did not just misplace them?" And something in his voice, something careful and already apologetic, told me that he knew something. I said, "Clifton, do you know where those rings are?" And he said, "Mama, let me call you back." And he hung up. He did not call me back that evening. He called me the next morning and he came over. Alone, without Tamara, which itself told me something. He sat at my kitchen table and he looked at his hands for a long time before he looked at me, and when he did, his eyes were tired and sorry in a way that went all the way down. He said, "Mama, I have to tell you something, and I need you to let me get through it before you say anything." He told me that about 3 months earlier. Tamara had gone through my house while I was at my neighbor Patricia's birthday luncheon. She had a key because they had one for emergencies. He said she had taken the rings and several other items, the silver frame, my mother's china, 2 pieces of jewelry from my dresser that I had not even fully registered as missing yet. He said she had sold them. He said she had sold them to a consignment jeweler in the city and used the money to cover 2 months of their mortgage payments. I looked at my son sitting across my kitchen table telling me that his wife had come into my home without my knowledge and taken my wedding ring, the ring his own father had placed on my finger, the ring I had worn for 43 years before. Arthritis made it too tight for my finger, and I had put it in that velvet box for safekeeping. the most personal and irreplaceable thing I owned in this world, and sold it for mortgage money, and he had known about it. Maybe not beforehand, but he had known for 3 months and had not told me. I did not yell. I want you to know that. I am not a yeller. Raymond was not a yeller, and I am not a yeller, and I sat there at that kitchen table, and I was very still and very quiet, and I said one thing. I said, Clifton, did she ask you before she did this? And he said, no, Mama, I did not know until after. And I said, but you have known for 3 months. And he said, yes. And I said, I need you to leave my house now. He started to say something, and I said, Clifton, I love you, but I need you to leave my house right now because I need to be alone, and if you stay here, I am going to say things I cannot take back, and I do not want to do that. He left. He sat in his car in my driveway for about 10 minutes. I could see the shape of it through the curtain, and then he drove away. I sat at that table for a long time after he left. The house was so quiet. Biscuit, my old gray cat, jumped up onto the table and pushed his head against my hand, and I held onto him, and I let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. Not just the ring, not just the things taken and sold, but the violation of it. The understanding that this woman had stood in my house, in my bedroom, had opened my nightstand drawer, had taken the velvet box that held the last physical pieces of Raymond, had looked at those rings and calculated their cash value, and had walked out of my home with them in her pocket, while I was eating birthday cake at Patricia's house, while I was laughing with friends and not suspecting a single thing, and my son had known for 3 months and had not told me. I called my daughter, well, not my biological daughter, but as good as one, my dear friend Nadine, who I have known since we were young women together, who knew Raymond almost as well as I did, who had been in that little white church on the day of our wedding and had cried through the whole ceremony. I called Nadine and I told her what had happened, and she was so quiet on the phone that I had to ask if she was still there, and she said, Estelle, we are going to fix this. I said, Nadine, you cannot fix a ring that has been sold. And she said, maybe not, but we are going to try. And we are going to do a lot more than try. Nadine came over the next morning, and she sat with me and we talked it all through, and she helped me think clearly when my own thoughts were running in too many directions. She asked me if I had the name of the consignment shop. I did not, but I knew the city was not that large, and there were only a handful of places that dealt in estate jewelry. She said, then we start calling. We spent that whole morning calling jewelry consignment shops and antique dealers and estate jewelers in the city. On the 4th call, I reached a shop called Callaway Fine Jewelry and Consignment on Broughton Street, and when I described the rings to the woman who answered, a gold band engraved inside with the date June 14th and 2 sets of initials, she went quiet in the particular way that means yes. She said, ma'am, can you come in? Nadine drove me there that same afternoon. The shop was small and warm and smelled like old wood and metal polish, and the woman behind the counter, the owner herself, a small woman named Georgia who had been running that shop for 30 years, listened to me tell the whole story with her hands folded on the counter and her eyes sharp and attentive. I brought the photos I had of the rings. Thank God I had photos from our wedding album and from a photo taken on our anniversary about 15 years ago, where my ring was clearly visible on my hand. Georgia said, those rings were brought in about 10 weeks ago by a young woman. She said the woman had identification and signed the consignment paperwork. She said legally the shop had done everything correctly. Then she paused and she looked at me and she said, but those rings have not sold yet. I have had them in the back because something about the transaction sat uneasy with me, and I did not put them in the case. I cannot tell you what that felt like. I cannot find the words for it. 30 years of prayer and goodness, and something sitting uneasy with a woman I had never met had kept my husband's ring in a back room for 10 weeks, instead of in a display case, where it would have been gone. I had to press my hands flat on that counter to keep myself steady. Georgia said she could not simply return the rings without going through a process. There was the matter of the consignment payment that had been made. I said I understood, and I asked what needed to happen, and she laid it out plainly, and I told her I would do everything that needed to be done. She said, give me a few days and come back with whatever documentation you have. I shook her hand and I thanked her, and when Nadine and I got back to the car, I sat there and I cried. Real crying. Relief and grief and anger and gratitude, all mixed up together into something that had no clean name. Now, here is where I want to tell you what I did and did not do, because this is the part people always want to know. I did not call Tamara that day. I did not call her the next day either. I thought about it. I thought about it a great deal. I thought about everything I wanted to say to this woman who had walked into my bedroom and taken the ring my husband had given me. I had quite a bit to say, but I had learned something over 78 years of living, and it is this. The most powerful thing you can do when someone wrongs you is handle it with clear eyes and a steady hand instead of a hot mouth. The hot mouth feels good for about 30 seconds and then it gives the other person something to argue about and distract from, and you lose the moral ground you were standing on. I was not going to lose my moral ground. I consulted with an attorney, a woman named Patrice, who had handled some estate matters for me a few years prior and who I trusted completely. I told her everything. She listened carefully, and then she told me that what Tamara had done was in fact criminal. Taking property that does not belong to you from someone's home without their knowledge or consent, regardless of having a key, is theft. She said I had grounds to file a police report and pursue it. She said the existence of the consignment paperwork with Tamara's signature and identification was actually helpful because it documented exactly who had taken the property and what had been done with it. I went home and I thought about that for several days, filing a police report against my son's wife, watching what that would do to Clifton, to their marriage, to whatever fragile thing remained of our family connection. I thought about Raymond and what he would have done. Raymond was a gentleman, but he was also a just man, and I believe he would have said, "Estelle, you do not let people take what is yours and walk away clean from it. That is not mercy. That is just letting wrong go uncorrected." I filed the report. I also contacted Clifton and told him what I had done and what I was doing and why. I told him plainly that I loved him and that this was not about destroying his marriage. That was between him and his wife and whatever God had to say about it. But I told him that his wife had come into my home and stolen the most personal thing I owned, and that I was not going to pretend otherwise, and I was not going to quietly absorb it to keep peace in his household. I told him the rings had not sold and that I was in the process of recovering them. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Mama, I am so sorry." And I said, "I know you are Clifton. I know you are." The recovery of the rings took about 3 weeks. Between the documentation and the legal process and Georgia at Callaway Fine, jewelry being thorough and decent about everything. But at the end of those 3 weeks, I sat in Georgia's back office and she placed both rings in that velvet box and handed it to me across her desk. I opened it and looked at them, and I thought about that afternoon in June, 44 years, Diego and the smell of gardenias and Raymond's hands shaking just a little as he put that ring on my finger, and the way he looked at me like I was something extraordinary, and I pressed the box against my chest, and I said, "Thank you, Lord," out loud right there in that back office, and Georgia pretended to be very busy with some papers on her desk to give me a moment, and I have liked her ever since for that. As for Tamara, she was questioned by the police. There was a period of several months where the matter was officially under review, and she had retained her own attorney, and the whole thing was unpleasant in the particular grinding way that legal processes are unpleasant. In the end, she was not prosecuted. There were circumstances and complications, and her attorney was good at his job, and the outcome was not what full justice would have looked like. I will not pretend otherwise, but here is what did happen. The truth of what she had done was fully out in the open. It was documented. It was real. Clifton could no longer look past it or minimize it or file it away somewhere and move on. Their marriage did not survive the following year. I did not celebrate that. I want to be clear about that because I know how it sounds. I did not want my son's marriage to end. I did not want my grandchildren, their daughter Keely, who was 4 years old, to grow up in a divided home. I prayed for a different outcome, but some things reveal a person so completely that the people who love them cannot unsee it. Clifton told me later that the ring was not the only thing. That once he started looking, he found other things, other decisions she had made without him, other lines she had crossed. The ring had just been the one that brought everything into the light. Clifton and I had a long and difficult and necessary conversation about his 3 months of silence, about knowing what she had done and not telling me. I did not let him off easy on that. I told him that his silence had been its own kind of betrayal, and that I needed him to understand that fully and not just feel bad about it, but actually understand it. He did. He does. It took time and it took several hard, honest conversations, but we got there. He is my son, and I love him, and there is nothing in this world that changes that. But love does not mean letting someone hurt you and then treating it like it did not happen. Love and honesty have to live in the same house, or neither one of them amounts to much. My granddaughter Keely comes to see me every other weekend now, and she is the most wonderful small person. She is 5 now, and she has Clifton's eyes and some energy, source inside her that runs at a frequency the rest of us cannot access. She likes when I read to her. Old librarian habits die hard, and she likes to help me water my garden pots on the porch, and she likes Biscuit, who is deeply unimpressed by her enthusiasm but tolerates it with dignity. She calls me Gran Estelle, and it is the best sound in the world. I want to tell you about the rings now, where they are and what I do with them. Raymond's band is back in the velvet box on my nightstand. My wedding ring is there too, but I also had my ring reset. I took it to a jeweler, not George's consignment shop, but a proper jeweler, and I had the diamond reset into a new setting, something I could actually wear again without it being too tight on my finger. I wear it now, every day, right here on my left hand. It took 44 years, and losing it and getting it back, and losing Raymond and getting a piece of him back through that ring, for me to finally put it on my finger where it belongs. Some lessons take their time arriving. I catch myself looking at it sometimes during the day, while I am reading or tending my garden or sitting on the porch watching the evening come in off the water, and I think about the June afternoon and the gardenias and Raymonds, shaking hands, and all the years we had together, and all the years since, and how much of a life is contained in one small circle of gold. How much history, how much love, how much of what matters most cannot be seen from the outside at all. I want to say something to you before I close, because I have been sitting here telling you this story, and the whole time there has been something I wanted to say that goes past the story itself. We spend so much time as we get older trying not to be a bother, trying not to cause trouble, trying to keep the peace in our families, even when the peace is being kept at our own expense. I did it too. I watched things feel off with Tamara for a long time, and I told myself to be patient, to be gracious, to give her the benefit of the doubt, and some of that was right and good. But some of it was me shrinking. Some of it was me deciding that keeping everyone comfortable was more important than standing up for what was mine. Your things matter. Your memories matter. The physical objects that connect you to the people you have loved and lost, they matter. And anyone who tells you they are just things, that they are not worth the trouble, has probably never held a velvet box with their husband's ring inside it and understood in their bones what it means to almost lose it forever. You are worth the trouble. Your history is worth protecting. Your love is worth protecting. And when someone takes something from you, whether it is a ring or your dignity or your sense of belonging in your own family, you have every right to stand up and say, "That belongs to me and I want it back." I got mine back. Not just the ring, all of it. The sense of myself. The understanding that I am not someone to be moved past or taken from or managed. I am Estelle June Hargrove. I am 78 years old. I spent 35 years helping children find themselves in books. I loved a good man for 43 years, and I have carried him with me for 11 years since. I live in a yellow house 2 blocks from the water in Savannah, Georgia, and I have a garden and a cat and a granddaughter who calls me Gran Estelle, and a best friend named Nadine who drove me to a jewelry shop on a Tuesday afternoon without asking a single question and stayed right beside me the whole time. I am still here. I am still standing, and my ring is on my finger where Raymond put it and where it is going to stay. Now you tell me where you are from. Drop your city right down there in the comments, because I want to know where my people are tonight. And if this story meant something to you, if it sat with you the way I hope it did, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you are here for the next one. God bless every single one of you wherever you are sitting right now. I will see you in the next story. You know, people ask me sometimes how I kept myself together through all of it, how I managed to stay calm when I wanted to scream, how I managed to think clearly when my heart was broken. And I always say the same thing. I say I had 35 years of sitting with children who were frustrated and lost and overwhelmed and learning how to help them find their footing. And somewhere in those 35 years, I learned that the most powerful thing in any difficult moment is not the loudest reaction. It is the steadiest one. I think about the children I used to work with a lot, especially in the hard times. There was a little boy in my library for 3 years, quiet and serious with big glasses that were always slightly crooked. And he used to come in every single lunch period and sit in the same chair in the corner and read, not because anyone told him to, just because the books were where he felt safe. I used to leave new books on that chair for him, things I thought he might like, without saying anything about it, just leaving them there. He came back to the school years later as a grown man to thank me, and I barely recognized him. Tall and confident and happy, and he said, "You always made me feel like I mattered in that library, like there was a place for me." That is what I wanted to give every child who came through my library, the understanding that there was a place for them, that they were seen, that someone had put something there just for them without being asked. I think about that little boy when I think about Raymond, because that is what Raymond gave me for 43 years. Not grand gestures, though he was capable of those, but the daily, steady, quiet practice of making me feel like there was a place for me, like I was seen, like he had put thought and care into my happiness without being asked. That is what you cannot put a price on. That is what Tamara held in her hand when she held my ring and looked at it and thought, this is worth some mortgage payments. She was not wrong about the dollar value. She was completely wrong about the actual value. There is no number for what that ring meant. There is no consignment price for 43 years of being loved well. I do not know if she ever understood that. I genuinely do not know. I have thought about it in the quiet evenings when Biscuit is asleep and the water is visible from my porch and the Spanish moss is moving and whatever breeze is coming off the harbor. I have tried to understand her, tried to see her as a person who was afraid and under pressure and made a terrible decision, rather than as simply a villain in my story. I think both things can be true at once. She was under real pressure, and she made a terrible decision, and that terrible decision revealed something about who she was that could not be unseen. All of that is true simultaneously. What I know is that whatever her reasons were, whatever her fears and pressures and rationalizations, I was a person to her, not just a resource, not just an inconvenient presence in her husband's life. I was a woman who had loved one man faithfully for over 4 decades and built a life and raised a son and worked 35 years and read to children and tended my garden and worn my ring until my fingers swelled with age. I was a whole person with a whole history, and that ring was not just metal and stone. It was my whole history sitting in a velvet box on my nightstand, and she treated it like a transaction. I forgave her eventually. I want to tell you that because forgiveness matters and I believe in it, and I have seen what holding on to unforgiveness does to a person over time. I have seen it in hospital waiting rooms and in the faces of people who have carried old anger so long they forgot there was a person underneath it. I forgave her, but forgiving someone does not mean pretending what they did was acceptable. It does not mean opening the door and welcoming them back in and hoping for the best. It means releasing the weight of the anger from your own chest so that you can breathe. Forgiving her was for me, not for her. She may not even know that I did it. Clifton is doing better now. He has been in his own apartment for about 1.5 years, and he is finding himself again, the version of himself that existed before those years of financial pressure and a marriage that was working against him in ways he was too close to fully see. He comes for Sunday dinner most weeks. We sit at my kitchen table and eat and talk, and sometimes we are easy with each other, and sometimes there is still a little weight between us from the things that happened and the months he stayed silent. But we are working on it. Every Sunday we work on it a little more. He told me a few weeks ago that he had been thinking about his father a lot lately. He said he had been thinking about what his father would have done, how his father would have handled things. He said he thought his father would have been disappointed in him. I sat with that for a moment, and then I said, "Clifton, your father loved you more than he loved being right. He would have been hurt. He would have wanted you to do better, but he would have still been your father every day through it. That is what a good man does." He disappointed me and came back from it. Clifton was quiet, and then he said, "Thank you, Mama," and I poured him more sweet tea. "I want to tell you one more thing, and then I will let you go. About 2 months after I got the rings back, I had a dream about Raymond. I do not dream about him often. I wish I did. But when I do, the dreams are always vivid and real in a way that regular dreams are not. In this dream, we were sitting on a porch, not my porch here in Savannah, some other porch, somewhere green and warm. And he was holding my hand and looking at my ring on my finger, and he said, "There it is," just like that. There it is. Like he had been waiting for it to come back. I woke up from that dream with my hand pressed to my chest in the velvet box on the nightstand in the early Savannah morning light coming through the window, and I lay there for a long time just feeling something I could not quite name. Peaceful, maybe. Settled, like something that had been tilted had come back to level. I got up. I made my coffee. I went out to the porch, and I watched the morning come in over the water. I looked at my ring on my finger in the early light. I thought about Raymond. I thought about the little white church and the gardenias in the June afternoon and 3 years of being loved by a good man. I thought about Clifton and Keely and Nadine and Georgia at the consignment shop who kept those rings in a back room because something sat uneasy with her. I thought about Patricia, my attorney, who told me I had grounds and that I should use them. I thought about 35 years of children and books and that little boy with the crooked glasses who grew up and came back to say thank you. And I thought, Estelle June Hargrove, you have had a good life, a real one, not an easy one, not a simple one, but a full and real and worthy one. And it is not over yet. It is nowhere near over yet. And you know what? That thought felt like the most beautiful thing in the world, sitting there in the Savannah morning with my coffee and my ring and my cat and the water 2 blocks away, and all my years and all my love and all my still unfinished story spreading out around me like something generous and alive. So wherever you are tonight, whatever you are carrying, whatever has been taken from you or is threatening to be taken, I want you to remember that your story is not finished either. The chapter where they took the ring is not the last chapter, not even close. There are chapters after it that you cannot see yet, and some of them are going to surprise you with how good they are. Keep going, sweetheart. Just keep going. Now drop your city in the comments. I mean it. I want to know where you are. And if this story touched your heart, please like it and subscribe and pass it on to someone who needs to hear that they can get through the hard thing and come out the other side still standing. God bless you all, every single one of you.